And lo, a certain lawyer stood up, trying him and saying, Teacher, what having done, life age, during shall I inherit? And he said unto him, In the law, what hath been written? How dost thou read it?
Okay, whoa. Before we even say welcome, what translation was that?
That Young's literal translation.
Young's literal translation. Okay.
It is nice to throw Young's in the mix once in a while because you'll catch things based on its literalness that it's not very readable, but it's helpful sometimes.
Okay.
I also did, it feels very Shakespearean to me sometimes. I like a little bit of a dust.
Low.
Yeah, the low was a good dead giveaway. That's good. Okay, well, welcome to Searching the Sacred, everyone. Lisa, Steph, and Jason with you as always. And we are glad that you have been diving into this series with us this season so far, where we've been kind of asking different questions. Normally we wrestle with different passages of scripture every time, but so far we've been diving into this question of what do you read and how do you read it? Who are you reading it with? What translation are you reading? Is the thing inerrant? What's going on with this Bible thing? How does theology impact it? And today we're going to be wrapping up this season by asking the question, who do you trust? Because one of the aspects that we highlighted a number of weeks ago was the idea of who are you reading it with and who's shaping how you read it. And so we're going to kind of wrap up our season by asking that question of how do you trust the people around you, whether it's your pastor, whether it's a small group, whether it's parents that have handed you something, whether it's us, like, why should you trust us? Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe that's the whole point, is that you should question everything we say. Maybe that's the ethos of 40 Orchards and Searching the Sacred. So we're going to wrap up this season today, but then we're not going to take quite as long a break. I know we took quite a bit of a summer break there for some of you that are frequent flyers with this podcast. We're not going to take quite as long a break. We want to hear from you in the meantime. So email info@40orchards.org because we want to find out what you want us to talk about next. We have some ideas. We're thinking of diving into the early church, looking at how the creeds were developed and how the creeds shaped the future of Christianity. And yet we're open to ideas. And so if you got some things that have been brewing or questions that have been popping as you've been listening to this, we want to hear what your thoughts are as we continue to navigate, trying to explore and search this text and figure out how we understand it, what does it say, and how we read it, and how we make sense of the world that we live in because of it. All right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to somebody else. I don't care who, and take it away.
I'm going to start with a story as we think about who to trust. This is an old story, but I think it'll get a good discussion going. So years ago, I read the book Contrarian's Guide to Leadership, and it was written by the person who was president of USC at the time. And I think this was, this is probably 15 years ago, if not 20. This is before social media. So I think that even makes a difference for interpreting what I'm about to say. And he said, as president of USC, he had made a commitment to never watch the news. And I heard him talk about this in a talk once because people were like, what? Like, that's opposite. Isn't it your job to be informed? And what he said was, I don't know the bias of the newscasters. I do know the bias of my colleagues. So instead of watching the news, I make an intentional step every day to stop by 5 different people's offices and ask them what is going on in the world that I should know about. Because I know them, I know how to filter what they say, and I know how to balance their perspectives on what's important that I should know about. And I don't know that about anything I would watch on cable news. And that's a rather extreme position, but I think it sort of gets this thing launching of what happens when someone is believable or has a good marketing, a good ability to make reels, whatever. But you don't know their bias and you don't know why they're doing it. You don't know where they're coming from. And how does that affect what we think is true? And how do we affect it? Just affects a lot. So I'm just curious what you guys think about that particular human's choice, but also if that translates to this conversation on like how we read the Bible and who we listen to and who we trust.
I don't work with enough people to do that. First of all, the world's very different in terms of workplace. And I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I think about it yet.
I think it's cool. I mean, he's at USC, right? He's at a really major university that has a lot of diversity of thought, or at least you would hope it has diversity of thought. So I could see him bumping into colleagues all the time. I mean, I worked on a much, 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 much smaller university here in the Twin Cities, and there's a number of people that I would have loved to have rubbed shoulders with daily to say, "Hey, what are your top 5, things that you're paying attention to in the news?" And that would have been actually a really fun source of information to figure out what's out there, what are people thinking about, and I think he's right. Like I would have had a better clue of you know what angle they're coming from, having known them and been around them, or listened to them lecture or whatnot. Um, but I think that's also our job when it comes to news, or when it comes to being in a church or being listening to a podcast, is to try to figure out, okay, what is the context, what is their background. Um, there's work you have to do to vet your sources, right? I mean, at some level, that's the job of every consumer. And the problem is we just don't do it. We just trust what people tell us to trust. So whether it's the news, it's like, oh, you should trust CNN, or you should trust the New York Times, or you should trust the Wall Street Journal or Fox News, or you should trust, this other, TikToker out here because they're super sourced or not. You know,
Mhm.
they
Well,
get the real story.
we do it naturally though with pastors.
Mhm.
Like we assume they're trustworthy because they're the pastor.
Right.
And then by extension, then there's also something about like, then anybody who's in the church is probably trustworthy, unless unless we clash and we don't like them. It's I find the dynamic of church community fascinating,
Mhm.
because partly it's so beneficial when you're in it. It really does personally benefit you to have that kind of a community where you're like, oh yeah, I know that. I know a plumber, they go to my church.
Mhm.
Oh, I know an electrician, they go to my church. They're going to give me a deal. They're going to be honest because we
Mhm.
go to church together. I can find a babysitter for my kids at church. I can bring them to preschool at church. There's a certain level of like, um, it's like I don't know, it's like a trust offering from really early on. I'm not sure that we ever vet it. I think
Mhm.
if you did go to church and you decide you like it, then it's kind of just a thing that's offered.
Mhm.
Be a
It's
lot of
like,
work to vet everybody.
yeah, well, I think that we just want to have a place where we can go, "Oh," and just relax and not
Mhm.
have to wrestle. It's actually one of the critiques I've heard of 40 Orchards over the years by some people. It's like, I don't wanna wrestle. I'm tired.
Mhm.
I would like somebody to just tell me some things. Um, and so I think there is a desire to just be able to sit and listen. And I think in a lot of churches, some churches, I think it is intentional misinformation. I do think that happens.
What do you mean by that? Like, unpack that for a minute, because you just said you said that some churches are intentional misinformation, which I'm not disagreeing with you, but that's a loaded statement that some people are gonna be like, "Whoa, kid, what are we talking about?" Like, am I going to one of those churches? Am I like?
Well, okay, I'm going to come back to it though, because I think most of the time it's not that. It's the problem of only hearing one person's opinion and not having a discussion about it, where it's not intentionally wrong or intentionally lead. It's just when you only have one voice, you end up moving in the direction of that person's opinion. The counter voices are the things that help make a better path. I don't know how to describe it, but like I think for most of the time, it's not like we have to vet it because people are intentionally manipulating us. But sometimes I think there are places where people are intentionally manipulating their congregants. Um,
It reminds me of the documentary. I think it was about Hillsong. I could be wrong. But there was a conversation then around like worship music, and that there's particular like music, there's particular like chords, and there's different things that actually cause emotions in your body. and like the songs are written, and I was like, oh, that's like another layer of something that I'd never considered inside of it. But like when somebody told me about it, or and I watched that thing, I was like, oh, that makes sense. It makes sense to me because there are times when you're at a concert and your body has the same response that it has when people are like raising their hands or really into worship. Like it happens when you're when you're at a Coldplay concert and you're like, wait, what the hell just happened?
Yeah. Try singing the song
Weird.
"Fix You" and not get emotional at a Coldplay concert, right?
Yeah. It's Doug Paget wrote a book about that years ago where he talked about being at a youth camp and sitting in the back and realizing that he had the youth. Like he knew he had been manipulating the room in the right way, that he had them and he could convince them of anything at that moment. And he like got disgusted with himself. He was like, oh my gosh, this is a formula. And I've been participating in the formula and I can see it. I can feel it. And it's a really powerful reflection to actually read someone tell that story and be like, at this moment, I can get all of these. I can get all of these youth to say yes to the gospel, but I feel really gross about it because I've been following the formula that gets them in and emotional. And I think a good example of the intentional misinformation, just to go back to that, would be like the documentary you mentioned last episode, or the one before, the Shiny Happy People documentary. That gets into some of the organizations that have had intentional manipulation, intentional power grabs, and they're not by any means the only ones, but that's just a good place people could go to say this does happen at this intentional level.
I think the thing is this is not just a critique just on the church. It is actually a critique for anything that holds power.
Yes.
Like anytime we know that there's a power differential, it doesn't matter what system we're in. Banking, criminal justice, church, like any system, when somebody holds power, where there's power over, that should be our first indicator of like, probably should make sure I have some safeguards of things, questions and things that I do around it, because power is where like it's so ripe for manipulation and harm.
Well, and you're talking about the power of communication and being able to wield that power either for good or for your own efforts, or for your own power. And I was listening to a podcast just yesterday, and it was talking about the 1929 stock market crash and all that happened like after that, and the election that took place in the 30s where Hoover lost. And what was really interesting is that the author of this book that came out was saying that Hoover actually had a better understanding of the market and of how things were working, but was just scared to pull the trigger because it would mean he had to admit that he had failed earlier in his presidency, and he couldn't articulate it well. He was a bad communicator. Whereas like Roosevelt came along and didn't actually understand the markets very well. He just knew we got to make a big change because this is going down the crap hole. And he's willing to like just do what the experts tell him to do. And he's a good communicator about it, and he can spin it really well. And so he does, and he looks like he's a genius, and Hoover looks like an idiot, even though Hoover actually was probably the smarter person. Not saying that he made the right decision, because he didn't. But anyway, the point is, communication actually matters, right? Like how you communicate, like you're talking about with like Doug Paget and like other systems of communicators, like you can really, I mean, quick story. I know we're kind of on this tangent of telling silly stories, but like we were planning a worship service one time, and we had this very serious topic we want to talk about. Like, can we trust God, essentially? Like when bad things happen, can God be trusted? And we were going to use this song to articulate that idea. And we knew that we were going to bring the room way down to this really like critical level of thinking, that it was going to sit heavy with them. But then we didn't want to leave them there. We wanted to give them some hope. And so we sang another song right after that. And we actually talked in the room about, we want a song that's going to grab their heart and like throw it on the floor. And like, it was just going to like tear them apart. And the worship team found one and they played it. And I'm telling you, there was not a dry eye in the whole room. Like it was actually really, and I think for some people, and here's the part that I'm a little bit like, okay, I get there's an issue here, but also I think for some people, there was a really important moment of like being honest about how it does seem like God has left us. It does seem like all hope is lost. And yet it's not over yet. Like God's not done. And I think for some people, like, the honesty of that was really important for them to have some clarity around. Now, was it emotionally manipulative to, like, make them cry about it? And we knew about it going into it? Yeah, probably a little. And also it was a really, I mean, people would walk away and be like, man, that was like the most beautiful, like, I haven't had that kind of experience in so long, and it was so helpful for me. It gave language, it gave emotion to my faith that I haven't had in so long. I mean, it was an interesting, like, what came out of it was really interesting.
I think the danger there, the fact that you're talking about it is part of what changes the danger of that. Because you're aware of what you were doing and you're willing to talk about what you were doing, and that, like, but also we're trying to do this thing. Like, what I think about is the people in our circles who just were always told, always and only told, that was the Holy Spirit.
Hmm.
And there wasn't ever a recognition of the human planning behind those Holy Spirit moments.
Yeah.
And that's when it's really a manipulative power thing, and a less trustworthy environment is when everybody in the congregation is just like, the Spirit just moves so beautifully here, and nobody's saying out loud. And
Right.
also, our worship planning team understands how to use emotion to get you to feel something when you're in our environment, you know?
Yeah.
Like, there's a lack of honesty about the event planning that's a part of the Sunday service at churches everywhere. And that people who are good at event planning understand how to have decorations and music and a message that all flow together to give you a meaningful experience. And not that that can't also be the Holy Spirit, but it also can be manipulation a lot.
100, like, there's also like, all you have to do is like pull into like some of the conversations in like capital campaigns, how we're raising money and what we're raising money towards, and how is it being branded, how is it being marketed, how is it being packaged to get people to commit to do it. And like, that's, it happens all, it's fundraising. So most of us, it's not a, it's super complicated because there's a
Hmm.
100 different ways to get people to like, to pull on a heartstring. That also reminds me of like Sarah McLachlan was talking about like the campaign with her song and the animals. Like, it's a it's, I just, our emotions are fascinating things and how they drive us. And it's not always towards bad things. It's not like it's not always bad. And
Yeah.
there is some level of, it's okay to be critical of it. And I think we don't
Yep.
I don't think we get critical about it. I think we just let it be and think it's so pure. And there's just not a lot of pure in the world.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So, how does that
Yeah.
affect our when we're thinking about the trustworthiness of how someone's interpreting scripture, and this idea of how a Sunday service can be manipulated for the emotional impact? How does that affect how we would say to people, like, who do you trust? How do you trust the scripture part?
Well, I think it's important to I know it seems like we're off on a tangent, right? Talking about worship music and manipulating through emotions and powerful communication skills and all that, whatever. The the reason why it's important, I think, is because when you talk to people about their experience at a church or at a chapel, if they're in college or something like that, oftentimes you say like, "Hey, how was it?" They're going to go, "Oh, I really liked it." That's what they're going to say. "Oh, I really liked it." Well, what did you like? Like, I like the music. I liked the stories. I liked the way they communicate. They're not gonna say like, "Oh, I really liked it when they, you know, dove in and did that Hebrew thing," and like, very rarely will you get that. You might get that a little bit if someone's like, you know, really wants to be taught, or wants to have a deeper conversation. Um, but very rarely are you going to get like, "Oh, I really liked it when they sounded like they were teaching a 300 level Bible class." You know,
Mhm.
they're going to be like, "Oh man, I thought they tied everything together so beautifully and it was really moving." Like, okay, like, that's why this is so important, right? Is because people are picking what they listen to, they're picking what church they go to, they're picking what in community to be a part of because of what they like, not particularly because of what they think is the most sound. And that is intriguing to me.
I think this feels sort of related, but a little bit different. There's authors I like or websites I like where I would say I think there's decent information on here, and where it's really worth listening to this teacher or reading this teacher. Um, but I don't always recommend it to people because it's so convincing that people don't feel like they can disagree with the teacher. It feels like they're being given the answer instead of a possibility of an answer. And there's particular movements that just end up with followers as compared to discerners, or whatever word we'd want to use about that, which feels similar of like, like, when someone is an expert, like let's say they are saying, I really like how this person unpacked the Hebrew. It's just really easy to listen to that person and be like, well, I don't know Hebrew, and you're really communicating this well, so you must be right.
Mm-hmm.
As compared to, there's still an opinion in there that I could interact with in some way, or there's still like I will use an example because I'm not trying to like say bad things about this example. I feel like so example comes to mind is the Bible Project. The Bible Project is a website, and they have a whole bunch of things out there where they've got reading plans, they've got videos, they've got a podcast, and really do a thoughtful job of honoring scholarly work around the biblical texts and trying to communicate that in such a way that people who haven't gone to seminary, who don't know the languages, can understand the scholarly aspect of things and incorporate that into their study. I happen to know Tim Mackey, who's one of the leaders of that, to be a good human. So even there, I would say this isn't like there's a bad human who's at the center of it. I know Tim Mackey, he's a good human. And I tend to not recommend them because people watch one of those videos and say, oh, that's what Genesis means. And I only recommend it as a resource when people are able to say, oh, that's a good possibility of what Genesis means. I appreciate hearing that perspective on what Genesis means. And to hold it with that, like this is decent teaching. I wonder what else is out there that might say something different than that, right? Like I don't want to recommend it until people can do some of that work of filtering, that even when it's really convincing, even when it's really well presented, even when it's really scholarly, it is not unbiased.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the like what I would say, one of the things that I learned is to search out different voices. Typically for me, I wait for like a little bit of a gut punch. Like when somebody writes something or says something that I'm like, oh, what? That actually makes me go, I probably need to spend a little time and see what is that because I feel like it's not true, or because I feel like it's so true? And I avoid it because it's so true. Is that what's been happening? Or is it like, no, actually, I don't think they're right. And because I think like what I would say, like the balance to like a Bible Project, there was like another podcast and a couple books, Aleph Beta, which is like does kind of a deep dive, but has a very different perspective on how Genesis is written and operates, and actually has done like most of the text. But there's plenty of times when I'm hearing it that I'm like, I don't agree. I think there's other possibilities. I think there's something else that could be said. And then maybe even then, like it's almost like I just rabbit trail off of whatever. Like I want somebody to like have a thought. I don't mind them saying like, this is what I think, this is what I believe this is. But I need to be able to have the thing to go, well, I disagree. And I'm going to find another source that maybe has a different perspective that lines up differently. And that doesn't mean, because I feel like that's the danger thing that I grew up with was like, if you disagree, like your flesh is going to want to not listen to the truth. And so you're going to, when you go searching for other stuff, you're just finding things to like appease yourself, and it's taken me a while to learn that's not true for most things, actually like finding different voices or finding different ways to like listen or explore something can be helpful to understand what I actually believe. It doesn't have to change my entire mindset. It's just another data point of like, oh, interesting. Like that's a fascinating way to look at it. I think that could be true. It may not be what I do. I don't know. I just think it's interesting that there's always like as if somehow somebody has nailed this. Like somebody has the truth. And I'm like, you realize like how many people are writing books, how many churches, denominations, pastors. I mean, and then like just good humans that have spent so much time in the text that actually read like are more biblically like knowledgeable and kind and doing great stuff in the world. And they have nothing to do with a church or a pastor. They're just a good human. There's just so many possibilities that I'm like, it's fascinating that what I was taught was like, don't step outside this. When I'm like, oh, yeah, I mean, in some ways I get it. I might not have grown or changed or done anything had I not stepped outside of it. My life would look very different. And I get that. Like there is a particular way that relationships evolve differently. And there's been relationships that have ended because you think differently. But there's a ton of beauty of like other folks that think differently and are out there. It's a risk either way.
I feel like that hits at our conversation about things like fact versus truth is like, what's the purpose of listening to the teachers we're listening to? Are we looking for a teacher to help us discover the true meaning, the fact, the singular, like once this person says this, no other commentaries will be written because there is a singular interpretation that is true. That's treating the Bible like it's fact. Once you know it, you just know it. As compared to treating it like it's sacred and treating it like there's deep truth in it, which inherently means multiple perspectives on it. Some better than others, but like a part of the work is intentionally reading those multiple perspectives because of the way that helps us find truth, and find a different kind of truth, than just a factual singular interpretation.
Well, and for all those that just got really uncomfortable with what Steph just said, remember the key verse that we've been reading at the beginning of every single episode of this season. What does it say? Which Jesus is not just quizzing this person. He's actually asking, like, what do you think it says here? And then how do you read it, right? Like, how do you interpret it? How do you understand it? How do you dive in? How do you make it personal? How do you see it playing out in the world? Like, there's a lot of implications to what Jesus is asking in those two questions. And it's not just simply, well, don't you remember what Deuteronomy 6:42 says? Like, he's not quizzing anyone. He's actually asking for them to dance with him, like to wrestle, to be conversational. He's inviting a dialogue. He's not. It's not a pop quiz, and if you get the answers right, then suddenly St. Peter opens the pearly gates, and you get to walk through. Like that's not how the Bible is meant to operate, and yet we've treated it like. I mean, we literally grew up with like Bible quizzing as an option for like kids to go to like competitions around the country and get together and quiz each other on the Bible on what it says and what it means. And like that's not how it was meant to be utilized. And that's what we were handed.
All it takes is to just sit in a circle with a pastor in the room and ask a question about the Bible and see who answers. Like everybody gets super nervous. If there's a pastor in the room, it's like everybody's a little bit like, I don't want to answer. Like the pastor should probably answer it. They're the expert on everything, or like they know everything. And so like it's just, and I feel like that is like the challenge for pastors is to teach in a way that is always leaving open the option that you might be wrong, maybe you misunderstood, or that there's other perspectives, and like how to actually encourage folks to be, like for some folks, they're not like, I mean, what you said, Steph, like some people don't want to wrestle. They're not going to do extra work to like find multiple perspectives. They're going to go to church on Sunday They're going to read, if you recommend a book, they might read it. But like really, primary voice is the pastor on Sunday. And I don't know that I don't think that's bad. I think what happens though is if it becomes like that's the voice and they are right. If you can go to it and you can go every Sunday and you can listen to your pastor and you can also go, I disagree. That one wasn't it. I don't think that's correct. Yeah, you could be wrong. I'm like, there's a way to hold it so that it's not like this thing. But the only way you learn that is from the same voice that you've elevated. And that is such a difficult dance of like learning how to trust somebody who's has authority, who is like, there's something that happened. I remember it so vividly when I was working at a large church, and it was a conversation about, I was like a little bit curious about seminary, but wasn't sure if I didn't know if I really wanted to do school. Like I was a fairly young mom at that point, youngish. And so it would have been a big tax on my family to even do that. But I had a lot of questions and a lot of curiosity, and I wanted to understand how we got to different points. And it was really painful because there were things that I disagreed with inside the church and like things to try to figure out. And I remember the pastor was like, well, you don't need to go to seminary. I can teach you everything you need to know. Here's a book on hermeneutics.
Wow.
And at the time, I was like, oh, that's cool. I won't have to go. I mean, like it takes time to figure out some of the things that feel like it feels like in hindsight, I'm like, holy buckets. What was I?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I feel like everything you were just saying there, Lisa, I feel like this becomes a thing people can do, like from this episode, is to think about who in your life have you pedestaled in some way, because that person is less trustworthy. Not necessarily because they are saying bad things, but because in you pedestaling them, you are no longer vetting them in the same way as before you pedestaled them. And so that becomes an internal check that's just about me. Am I like overly listening to one person's opinion on something? Am I treating their teaching like a Taylor Swift album that I'm like lined up to get? Am I balancing it with somebody else? Because it happens in 40 Orchards when, like, one of the power of co-leadership, I facilitate the groups more often. And when Lisa's not there, people start to pedestal me. And it's really hard for me to get myself off the stupid pedestal because they want that, oh, look, somebody to like finally tell me the real interpretation. I'm like, that's not what I'm doing. I'm facilitating the conversation for all of us to listen to each other. But it's just human nature to want to put somebody up there, and that makes it a less trustworthy voice just because you've done that, not because the person's not trustworthy.
Well, and I would add to that, not confront that, but add to it by saying like we're naturally going to pedestal people. That's part of being human. When we don't know everything, we naturally look to people who seem to know more than us. Like, I listen to political podcasts because I'm not in Washington sitting in meetings, or I don't have the experience of being there. So I appreciate people that have done the work, have been a part of the conversations, understand how it works, and can help kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and give me some insight into how our country operates. Like I don't mind that. Now, I need to know what like bias they're bringing to that conversation. Because if I think they're just giving me the truth, like capital T, or they're just relaying only facts, no, that's ridiculous, right? Like, no, they're cherry picking and choosing how to communicate, but I think we naturally want to pedestal people. It's just a question of what do we do with them once they're there, and are we willing to recognize the angles? Because I would even say like I've pedestaled the two of you when you talk. I've been in dozens of circles with the two of you, and when you guys speak, I listen. And I trust that the work that you've done with the Hebrew scriptures or with the New Testament has been quality work, and I should pay attention to how you're interpreting. But then I also am willing to say, but maybe, or, okay, cool. Let's not just stop there. You guys do a good job of saying, I am facilitating, or I am just offering one interpretation, or I am offering three interpretations. Now, what do you think? Right. But there's a power in doing that, right? When you say, here are 3 different ways you can understand this passage, like, you sound really damn smart, right? And even when you're trying to knock yourself off a pedestal, you're kind of putting yourself right back up there. I'm not saying you're doing it. Like, I do this when I preach. Like, I'll say, hey, we can approach this 3 different ways. And I'm trying to create dialogue, but ultimately people are just going to go like, wow, that was really smart. And
Look at
wherever
how
he
humble
landed must be
Jason
where we're
is.
supposed to land. What'd you say?
I said people would be like, "Oh, look at how humble Jason is," and then you're back up the pedestal again.
Exactly. I mean,
But
that can be what happens.
I think it's partly it's this acknowledgement though. Yeah, there is some smarts in the room.
Mhm.
We've done some work. We've lived some life. We have different experiences, and we can still be so wrong.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It doesn't. I mean, smart people do some terrible shit. Like
Mhm.
it's like it's and it's. I mean, I just see enough of it, and it's probably partly because of like how how my feed is wired. Like I mean, I get constant notifications of like, oh, here's somebody that's been charged with this crime or charged with that crime, and here's this and here's that, and I'm like, oh, these are all people that have authority and power. And like I go through in the prison, we go through PREA trainings, and it's a really big deal because if you are an incarcerated person, you don't have power, and so everybody else then becomes you are at fault. Even as a volunteer inside of that system, I have power over the folks who are incarcerated. So if I abuse that, it's on me. It's on me because I have the power. And like I feel like that's actually a really good practice for me is to actually be, consistently having to do a PREA training and know what it is and how it works and how to make sure that folks have that resource reminds me of how anybody who holds power has the capacity, like all of us have the capacity to do something harmful. Like the amount of harm is probably there's a very large spectrum there, but we all have that. And just like we all have the propensity, we could be wrong. I mean, there's been multiple studies where Steph is like, she's very gentle if she's course correcting, but like sometimes I'll say something that's just wrong. Like I've missed it in the text or I read it wrong or I forgot what part came later and I thought it came earlier. Like it's innocent. It's not to be manipulative. It's just an innocent, like, oh, that was totally wrong. And had Steph not been in the room, it would not have got corrected.
That's where I would just keep arguing for the power. Co-leadership is a natural corrective on this because you're putting more than one person in authority to correct each other behind the scenes and in front of the people too, to say like, oh, look at how, and that happened after we had a circle where I had started the circle in a particular direction. And afterwards, Lisa was like, how'd you choose that passage? And I was like, it's probably the wrong choice. Actually, I think we need to change and like contact because, but we got to have that conversation. And so I think that maybe that would be the challenge for any leaders listening of what check, because so many people in a congregation are not going to do this work of really trying to wrestle with what a pastor is saying. Pastors, then who are you in community with that can help you see your biases, that can help you course correct, that can help you read from multiple sources so that you are being as responsible as possible with that pedestal that you've been put on. And offering offering things that you can about what other people would say and recognizing the way your own ego is going to really like that pedestal.
Well, and I think that's the invitation maybe for people in a church is to say, like, take your pastor out for coffee and ask him questions. Like, the worst time to offer a critique of a sermon is right after it's given, because like, regardless of who your pastor is, they probably put a lot of energy, both physically, mentally, and emotionally into that 20 to 40 minutes, whatever length it is. It's an emotionally draining exercise. So maybe not right after. Be like, I actually think differently. Like, it's fine. But maybe like a couple of days later, Monday rolls around, Tuesday rolls around, just send the email and just say, hey, I have some questions about, what you shared on Sunday, and I would love to like have an opportunity to ask them. Most pastors that I know are like, oh, okay. I mean, I would be like, oh, great. Like, let's chat. Like, what are you wrestling? I mean, I had someone walk up to me the other day and be like, okay, this isn't what you talked about, but can you help me understand like the 7-day creation versus like, you know, like intentional design or poetic beginning of the Bible? Like, I really get stuck on like 7 days of creation. And I'm like, okay, like, yeah, we should grab lunch and like, we can have that conversation. Like, let's chat, and so those are like actually fun. You kind of get to show your work, right? Like,
Mhm.
and you
I
get to be challenged or wrong, and that's okay.
I think that's great, but it speaks to the size of your congregation, and
True.
manageable
Mhm.
sizes of congregation matter.
Mhm.
The
True.
mega
True.
church movement has some serious problems because you can't email your pastor and do that.
Mhm.
That's not
Yeah.
happening. Like, nobody's grabbing lunch with Furtick, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because it's not tenable. They don't do. Maybe there's a random. Maybe they let a few people in, like 2 coffees a
Mhm.
month or whatever. I'm sure there's a schedule. Like, and I think that's as churches get larger and less local, like if you're
Yeah.
traveling in different things, it
Yeah.
changes then I think how you actually have to do this work. I think when
Mhm.
you're in a local small congregation, you can do exactly what you're suggesting, Jason. I think
Yeah.
the challenge is that we have a lot of folks that are in larger churches where that is more difficult unless you're super like connected and involved in somehow, like if you're like
Yeah.
doing a job for free inside, then you might have
Mhm.
access. But otherwise, it's really hard to figure out how to, like, how do you have that conversation?
Mhm.
How do you push back?
That's a really good point. That's a really good
Mhm.
point. And hopefully there's like, if you are in a church that's doing something like a mega church, hopefully there's enough people that you've built relationships with that you can maybe just talk to them about it. Like, pull aside and say, "Hey, can we grab coffee? Because I know you were at Sunday service too. I'm wrestling with what was said, and here's why. I feel like I can trust you to like talk about it, or you know, if it's a big enough church, they're gonna have a podcast, so you can like send it to someone you do trust and say, "Hey, listen to this, and let's grab lunch." And
Mhm.
I want, send it to Steph and Lisa, and have them listen to it, and then have them go out for coffee and have a good conversation.
Well, I was just thinking actually that one of the other things people could do is contact us for like resources on things. Like, hey, I heard this sermon and it's really sparked my interest in interpretations of Genesis. Let's say that was the example we gave before. Do you guys have places that you would recommend? And that one of the things we do as humans and as an organization is we intentionally would give multiple perspectives on that. So I love Walter Brueggemann. I love Richard Rohr. And Lisa would be like, let's give a non-white cisgendered old guy um, how about let's also throw in some Dr. Wilda Gaffney? Like, that's a good idea. And how about we also throw in some Tikva Frymer-Kensky from the Jewish perspective? Like, so then we can throw a few different sources people's way where you can be like, these are all intelligent, thoughtful, scholarly perspectives, and they're all different. So what
Hmm.
this isn't saying is it can mean anything. Like it's not the multiplicity of views does not mean that like we're completely untethered to any sense of meaning in the text. It means that just holding those possibilities starts to make things more trustworthy and more interesting. We have much more interesting conversations when there's multiple possibilities.
Like, it reminds me of when the Shack came out, and like some churches lost their damn minds, and some were like, "It's fine." But like for some folks, it takes it too far. And it's like the way of, I think what helps is when you have people who are saying, what's a good book to just kind of blow things up a little bit? Read The Shack. And like there's some problems. It's not a perfect thing. It's not even like it is a writing, but what it might do is offer you a way to hear a voice differently. And then that imagination getting sparked in you can, when you take it to the text, you can read it differently.
Mm.
Right? Like, it's these little things of, it doesn't mean that like we have we have the right references.
Mhm.
But oftentimes we can talk about like, here's this is why I would recommend this perspective, and then I would also swing and make sure that you kind of pop into this perspective. Like, this one might feel a little fringier. This one might be might push at you a little bit. You might take a deep breath here or there, notice what's happening in your body. Take a minute. Like, just notice what's happening. Why do you feel that way? What's it hitting on? Why does it feel that way? And then just keep reading and see what else happens. But there's a way of acknowledging those things and offering resources that can continue to expand and bounce off of things. And it's not like, I don't think Steph or I have any book where we say, like, this is the non-negotiable. You have to, like, this is the one you got to read. Like, I rely on the Reverend Dr. Wilda Gaffney quite a bit, but I feel like there's she's got like these intersections of Jewish and Christian and Black and woman. And you put those four things together and you now have a really unique perspective in one source. Oftentimes we have to go to multiple sources to get such a breadth of like diversity in one thing. So like, that's why, like, she's the closest to come, like, she's my most referred, but I would never just say, that's all you have to read. In a million years, I would never offer that.
Well, and I think that might be a great place to wrap up our season, right? With saying, explore multiple sources, be willing to ask better questions, email info@40orchards.org if you have questions or want coffee. Be willing to wrestle with people, test things, ask, does this make sense to me? Keep asking people in your life, what does it say and how do you read it? Find out who's around you and be on the journey.
I would love to end with some words by Padre Gautama, who I'm probably saying his name wrong again every single time I mention his name on the podcast.
You just got to listen to him introduce himself a few times. And
I got to practice his name. But I think he ends up being a trustworthy source for me too, because he's lived in Ireland working through reconciliation work in scripture. And so these are prayers from the Corrymeela community there. But I'm going to read a little quote from him and then a prayer. And I think that's a great sort of just ending with a poetic prayer is kind of a nice end to this. But he says, to engage with the text this way requires careful and heartfelt reading, noticing the nooks and crannies where the imagination can lodge, paying attention to the curiosities that emerge and creating a stopping point there. In doing so, a new story emerges, the story of rhetoric between the text and the reader. Unexpected moments have the light of your attention shone on them. The story changes, we change. We find a new way into an old story. This is the work of theology. It is also a work of intelligence, and it is a work of prayer. God of the story, you are in and out of the stories we read, calling us into them and calling us out of them. Give us courage to listen to our own curiosities as we read old stories. Dare us to ask the questions hidden in the heart of the text. Lead us to mine, with heart and mind and desire and desperation, the many meanings in the one story, because this is where we find you and where you find us. Amen.
This has been a 40 Orchards podcast. At 40 Orchards, our mission is to create circles for all people to wrestle through biblical text so that together we can expand each other's experience of what is sacred, whole, and good. We search through the lens of sacred possibility, assuming there is more to be discovered, questioned, and applied as we listen for how God is still speaking. You can learn more about 40 Orchards and sign up for a study by going to 40 orchards.org. Our opening music is by Les FM. Our closing music is by NCR Music Vibes. Additional music is by 3 Music. Any references to books or other sources can be found in the show notes of this episode. Thank you for searching the sacred.